The great hall of the Galactic Council was filled with fear. Ambassador stood at the center podium, his blue skin darker than usual. His 4 arms shook as he held the data pad containing the latest reports. Around him, representatives from 47 different alien races sat in silence. The air was thick with worry. 3 more star systems are gone, announced. His voice echoed through the massive chamber. The system, the twin suns of and the Epsilon colonies. He paused, looking at the faces around him. That makes 212 civilizations destroyed in the past 6 months. A low murmur spread through the hall. The representative, Commander Ara, stood up. Her tall, thin frame cast a long shadow as she spoke. How many ships did we lose this time? Shoulders dropped. All of them, 10,000 ships from our combined defense fleet, gone in less than 4 hours. The murmur grew louder. Some delegates began talking in their native languages. Others simply stared at the floor. Elder, the oldest member of the council, raised one of his 6 hands for silence. "Tell us about the Devourer swarm," said. His ancient voice was calm, but his eyes showed deep concern. "What did our sensors record?" Touched his data pad. A huge holographic display appeared above the center of the hall. It showed the space battle that had taken place 3 days ago. The council members watched as thousands of their ships fired at the enemy. The Devourer swarm looked like a cloud of metal insects. Each unit was about the size of a small building. They moved together like a living thing, flowing through space like water. When the first shots hit them, something strange happened. The machines stopped for just a moment. Then they began to change. "Watch carefully," said. "Our plasma cannons hit them first, see how they adapt." On the display, the first wave of Devourers began to glow with the same energy as the plasma weapons. When the next volley of plasma shots hit them, the attacks simply passed through them harmlessly. "They learned to become plasma-resistant in 30 seconds, Commander Ara said. Her voice was bitter. "Then we tried quantum torpedoes." The display showed the second wave of attacks. The Devourers adapted again, this time faster. In 15 seconds, they were immune to quantum weapons. "Gravitational disruptors, ion cannons, antimatter missiles," continued. "Every weapon we used, they learned to defeat, and not just defend against, they are weapons and use them against us." The hologram showed the terrible truth. The Devourer machines began firing the exact same weapons back at the Council ships, but their versions were stronger, more accurate. Within an hour, the entire defense fleet was destroyed. "How is this possible?" asked Senator from the Republic. His insect-like features twitched with nervousness. "No machine should be able to adapt that quickly." Doctor, the Council's chief scientist, activated her own data display. "We believe the Devourer swarm was created as the ultimate weapon. Every time it encounters new technology, it doesn't just learn to defend against it. It completely understands it, improves it, and adds it to its own capabilities." The hall fell silent. Everyone understood what this meant. "Each battle makes them stronger," Doctor continued. "Every ship they destroy, every weapon they encounter, every piece of technology they analyze, it all becomes part of them. They grow smarter, faster, and more deadly with every victory." Elder leaned forward in his floating chair. "Where did they come from?" "Unknown," Doctor replied. "They appeared 6 months ago at the edge of our galaxy. No communication, no demands. They simply began destroying everything in their path." Commander Ara slammed her fist on her desk. "There has to be something we can do. We are the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Our technology has protected us for thousands of years." "Our technology is exactly the problem," Doctor said quietly. "The more advanced our weapons become, the stronger the Devourers get when they copy them. It's like fighting an enemy that becomes more powerful every time you hit it." Brought up another display. This one showed the path of destruction across the galaxy. Red marks showed where entire civilizations had been wiped out. The pattern was clear. The Devourers were heading straight for the heart of the galaxy, where the most populated systems were located. "At their current rate of advance, they will reach the core worlds in 2 months," said. "The core worlds contain over half of all life in our galaxy, trillions of beings." The reality of their situation hit everyone in the room. They were facing extinction, and their greatest weapons were useless. "What about the other galaxies?" asked Senator. "Can we evacuate, ask for help?" "The nearest galaxy is too far away," Elder replied. Even our fastest ships would take 50 years to reach it, and we have no way to contact civilizations that far away. For several minutes, no one spoke. The only sound was the quiet humming of the life support systems. Finally, Doctor cleared her throat. "There might be one option," she said slowly, "but you're not going to like it." All eyes turned to her. She activated a small display showing a blue and green planet in a distant spiral arm of the galaxy. "The humans," she said. The reaction was immediate. Several delegates began talking at once. Some laughed, others looked angry. "The humans are barely a space-faring species," Commander Aura said. "They only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. Their technology is primitive." "Exactly," Doctor replied. "That might be what we need." Elder raised his hand for silence again. "Explain." "The Devourer swarm adapts to advanced technology. But what if we used technology that wasn't advanced? What if we used weapons and tactics that were so simple the Devourers couldn't learn from them?" The suggestion hung in the air like a bad smell. The idea of asking a primitive species for help went against everything the Galactic Council believed in. "They're violent," Senator said. "Their entire history is nothing but war and destruction. They fight with each other constantly." "Maybe that's exactly what we need," Elder said thoughtfully. "A species that knows how to fight dirty." Looked around the room. He could see the fear and desperation on every face. They had run out of options. "All in favor of contacting the humans," he said. Slowly, hands and appendages rose around the room. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. "Motion carried," announced. "May the gods help us all." The message arrived at Earth's Deep Space Communication Center at 3:47 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Dr. Lisa Park was working the night shift when her instruments detected something impossible. The signal was coming from outside the solar system, but it wasn't random space noise. It was organized, deliberate, and clearly artificial. "This is incredible," she whispered to herself as she ran the signal through the translation computers. The message was in multiple languages, some of which Earth's computers had never seen before. But buried in the data was a desperate plea for help, repeated in broken English. Within 6 hours, the message had reached Admiral Sarah at the Pacific Defense Command. Admiral was a short, serious woman who had spent 30 years in the military. She had fought in 3 different wars and commanded Earth's largest space fleet, but she had never received a message from aliens before. "Play it again," she told her communications officer. The translated message filled her office. "Galactic Council to human civilization. Urgent assistance required. Galaxy-wide extinction threat. Devourer swarm has destroyed over 200 civilizations. Traditional weapons ineffective. Request immediate military assistance. Will provide navigation data and technical specifications." Admiral stared at the message for a long time. Then she picked up her secure phone and called the President. 4 hours later, President sat in the Situation Room with her top advisors. The room was underground, deep beneath the White House. Around the table sat the Secretary of Defense, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Earth's leading scientists. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," President said. "Aliens are real, they're in trouble, and they want our help to fight some kind of space monsters." Doctor, the director of the Institute for Advanced Sciences, nodded. "The data they sent is remarkable. These Devourer machines are unlike anything we've ever imagined. They don't just destroy, they learn and adapt to every weapon used against them." General Harrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, leaned forward. "What kind of weapons are these aliens using?" Doctor pulled up a holographic display. "Plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, gravitational disruptors, antimatter missiles. Technology so advanced that most of it is purely theoretical to us." "And these machines learn to defend against all of it?" Admiral asked. "Not just defend," Doctor replied. "They the weapons and made them better. Every battle makes them stronger." Secretary of Defense James Mitchell shook his head. "This sounds like science fiction. How do we know this isn't some kind of elaborate hoax?" "The signal came from 43 light-years away," Doctor said. "The mathematical models they included are centuries ahead of our current understanding, and the navigation data they sent shows star positions that we can verify with our telescopes. This is real." President was quiet for several minutes. Everyone in the room waited for her decision. Finally, she spoke. "What are our chances if we help them?" Admiral looked at the data again. Honestly, not good. If their advanced weapons couldn't stop these things, I don't see how our technology could do any better. Maybe that's the point, said Dr. Sarah, the chief weapons researcher. Everyone turned to look at her. Think about it. These machines adapt to advanced technology, but what if we used technology that wasn't advanced? General Harrison raised an eyebrow. Explain. Well, according to this data, the Devourers analyze energy weapons, exotic matter, quantum effects, all the high-tech stuff. But what if we used weapons they couldn't analyze? Like what? Admiral asked. Like a rock, Doctor said simply. A really big rock moving really fast. The room was silent for a moment. Then General Harrison started to smile. Kinetic weapons. Exactly, Doctor said. Mass drivers, good old-fashioned bullets. Physics so simple that there's nothing to analyze. You can't adapt to a chunk of metal hitting you at 10% of light speed. It either destroys you or it doesn't. Admiral was already thinking about Earth's military capabilities. We've been developing kinetic weapons for decades. The military said they were too simple, not sophisticated enough. But maybe simple is exactly what we need. President looked around the table. What would we be sending? I'd recommend the Third Fleet, Admiral said. 200 ships, our and best, all equipped with kinetic weapon systems. 200 ships against machines that destroyed thousands of alien vessels, Secretary Mitchell asked. The aliens were fighting the wrong kind of war, Admiral replied. They were trying to out-tech the enemy. We're going to out-simple them. Doctor brought up another display showing Earth's military technology. Our weapons are crude compared to alien technology. We still use explosives, projectiles, and basic chemical rockets. But maybe that's our advantage. General Harrison nodded. The aliens probably think we're primitives. They might be right, but primitives can be very good at killing things. President made her decision. Admiral, you have authorization to deploy the Third Fleet. Doctor, I want every kinetic weapon we have loaded onto those ships. Doctor, work with the aliens to get our ships to the battle zone. Yes, Madam President, they replied in unison. Over the next week, Earth space forces prepared for humanity's first interstellar war. The alien navigation data was complex, but human engineers worked around the clock to modify Earth ships for the long journey. The Galactic Council provided coordinates for the expected location of the next Devourer attack. Admiral stood on the bridge of the EAS Determination, the flagship of the Third Fleet. Through the viewports, she could see the rest of her fleet preparing for departure. Each ship was loaded with kinetic weapons, mass drivers and missile systems carrying simple explosive warheads. Her weapons officer, Commander Jackson, approached with a report. All ships report ready, Admiral. Kinetic systems are charged and loaded. Any word from the aliens? Admiral asked. They're surprised by our weapon choices, Commander Jackson replied. They keep asking if we have any energy weapons or advanced defensive systems. Admiral smiled grimly. Tell them we prefer the direct approach. As the fleet prepared to leave Earth's solar system, Admiral thought about the battle ahead. She had read every report about the Devourer swarm. She knew they were facing an enemy that had destroyed hundreds of civilizations. But she also knew something the aliens didn't understand. Humans had been killing each other with simple weapons for thousands of years. They had perfected the art of making things dead using basic physics. While other species reached for complex solutions, humans had always believed in the power of hitting the enemy hard and fast. All ships prepare for hyperspace jump, Admiral announced over the fleet communication system. Remember, we're not just representing Earth today, we're showing the galaxy what humans can do. The fleet activated their hyperspace drives, technology borrowed and modified from alien designs. But the weapons they carried were purely human, simple, brutal, and effective. As the stars stretched into lines around them, Admiral felt a cold determination settle in her chest. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the oldest solutions were the best solutions, and sometimes primitive was exactly what you needed to win a war. The Third Fleet disappeared into hyperspace, carrying humanity's answer to an impossible enemy. Behind them, Earth waited and hoped. Ahead of them, an ancient enemy that had never faced anything quite like human warfare was about to learn a very hard lesson. The Nexus was the largest space station in the galaxy. Built over 300 years, it was home to 50 billion beings from dozens of different species. The station was so big that it had its own weather systems and artificial gravity fields that created floating cities inside its massive structure. It was a symbol of what different civilizations could build when they worked together. Admiral H stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Eternal Vigilance. Around him, the largest defense fleet ever assembled waited in perfect formation. 25,000 ships from 30 different worlds, representing the best military technology the galaxy had to offer. Each ship was a masterpiece of engineering, equipped with weapons that could destroy entire planets. "Status report," Admiral H commanded. His people, though, were known throughout the galaxy as master warriors. Their blue-scaled skin was marked with battle scars, and their 4 eyes could track multiple targets simultaneously. "All ships report ready for combat," replied Commander. "Plasma batteries charged, quantum torpedo tubes loaded, gravitational disruptors online. Every ship has been equipped with the latest adaptive shielding technology." Admiral H nodded. The fleet had learned from previous battles with the Devourer swarm. Instead of using standard shields, each ship now carried experimental adaptive defenses that could change their properties in real time. If the enemy tried to copy their weapons, the shields would automatically adjust to counter the attack. "What's the status of the evacuation?" Admiral H asked. 60% complete, Commander replied. "We have refugee ships leaving the station every few minutes, but there are still 30 billion beings on board." Through the massive viewport, Admiral H could see the stream of ships fleeing the Nexus. Civilian vessels of every size and shape were departing as quickly as possible. But the station was so large that full evacuation would take weeks, and they had been told they had hours at most. "Long-range sensors detect hyperspace distortions," the sensor officer announced. "The Devourer swarm is approaching." Admiral H felt his 4 hearts beating faster. He had read every report about the Devourers, had studied every battle recording, but seeing the enemy in person was different. The swarm emerged from hyperspace like a dark cloud spreading across the stars. Individual units were impossible to count. There were millions of them, each about the size of a heavy cruiser. They moved together in perfect coordination, flowing through space like liquid metal. No communication signals, no energy signatures beyond basic propulsion. They simply advanced toward the Nexus with mechanical precision. "All ships prepare for combat," Admiral H ordered. "Remember the plan, we hit them with everything we have all at once, don't give them time to adapt." The first volley from the defense fleet was spectacular. 25,000 ships fired simultaneously. Plasma beams, quantum torpedoes, gravitational distortion waves, and antimatter missiles filled the space between the fleet and the swarm with deadly energy. For a moment, Admiral H allowed himself to hope. The attacks hit the swarm directly, and thousands of Devourer units were destroyed in the first few seconds. Brilliant explosions lit up space as the most advanced weapons in the galaxy found their targets. But then something changed. The surviving Devourer units stopped moving. For exactly 30 seconds, they hung motionless in space while the defense fleet continued firing. Admiral H watched his sensors carefully, waiting for signs of retreat or surrender. Instead, he saw something much worse. "Sir, the enemy units are changing," the sensor officer reported. His voice was filled with confusion and growing fear. On the main display, Admiral H could see individual Devourer units reshaping themselves. Their dark metal surfaces began to glow with the same energy signatures as the weapons that had been fired at them. In less than a minute, they had completely transformed. "Impossible," Commander whispered. The swarm began to advance again. But this time, when the defense fleet fired their weapons, something terrible happened. The plasma beams simply passed through the Devourer units without causing any damage. The quantum torpedoes exploded harmlessly against energy shields that perfectly matched their frequency. Every weapon that had been used against them was now completely ineffective. "All ships switched to secondary weapon systems," Admiral H ordered. The fleet began firing ion cannons and particle beam weapons. These were older technologies, but they had hoped the Devourers wouldn't be ready for them. The swarm adapted again. This time it took only 15 seconds. "Tertiary weapons," Admiral H commanded. "Fusion missiles and electromagnetic pulse weapons." 10 seconds. The Devourers learned to counter the new weapons in 10 seconds. But the worst was yet to come. The Devourer units began to change again, but this time they weren't just defending, they were copying. The first return volley from the swarm used plasma weapons identical to what the defense fleet had fired at them. But these versions were different. They were more focused, more powerful, and they cut through the fleet's shields like they were made of paper. "Evasive maneuvers," Admiral H shouted. "All ships scatter." But it was too late. The Devourer swarm had learned everything about the defense fleet's weapons in the first few minutes of battle. Now they were using improved versions of those same weapons against their creators. The battle became a nightmare. Every time the defense fleet tried a new weapon or tactic, the Devourers adapted it. Within an hour, the enemy was using gravitational disruptors that were twice as powerful as the originals. Their quantum torpedoes could penetrate any known shield technology. Their plasma weapons could melt through the strongest armor ever created. Admiral H watched helplessly as his ships were destroyed one by one. The Eternal Vigilance shook under enemy fire, her shields failing rapidly. "Sir, we've lost 60% of the fleet," Commander reported. "Should we retreat?" "No," Admiral H replied. "If we retreat, they'll follow us back to the core worlds. We have to stop them here." But stopping them seemed impossible. The Devourers weren't just winning the battle, they were learning from it. Every destroyed ship gave them more technology to copy. Every new weapon they encountered made them stronger. "Sir, they're targeting the station," the sensor officer announced. Admiral H looked at the tactical display. A group of Devourer units had broken away from the main battle and were heading directly for the Nexus. The station's defensive weapons began firing, but Admiral H knew it wouldn't matter. The Devourers had already learned to counter every weapon the galaxy possessed. The attack on the station was swift and methodical. The Devourers didn't just destroy the defensive systems, they analyzed them and improved them. Within minutes, they were using the station's own weapons against it, but with 10 times the power. The evacuation ships tried to escape, but the Devourer units were faster. They caught the fleeing vessels one by one, not bothering to destroy them quickly. Instead, they seemed to be studying the ships, learning about their engines, their life support systems, their navigation computers. "They're everything," Admiral H realized with horror. "Every piece of technology, every system, every innovation we've ever created. They're building a complete database of galactic civilization." The Nexus began to break apart under the Devourer assault. Sections of the massive station exploded in silent flashes, sending debris spinning into space. The artificial cities inside collapsed as the gravity generators failed. 50 billion beings died in less than 2 hours. But the Devourers didn't stop there. As the station died, they began to systematically dismantle it piece by piece. Every computer core, every data bank, every technological component was carefully removed and absorbed into the swarm. They weren't just destroying a civilization, they were stealing everything that civilization had ever learned. Admiral H's flagship was one of the last ships still fighting. The Eternal Vigilance was heavily damaged, but her crew refused to surrender. They kept firing even as their weapons failed one by one. "Sir, all our systems are failing," Commander reported. "The enemy has learned to counter everything we have." "Then we do this the old way," Admiral H said. "Set a collision course for the largest Devourer unit, full ramming speed." The Eternal Vigilance turned toward the swarm, her engines straining to build up speed. But even this desperate tactic failed. The Devourers had learned about ramming attacks from previous battles. They simply moved out of the way at the last second, letting the flagship pass harmlessly through empty space. Then they destroyed it with its own weapons. Admiral H died knowing that his fleet had not just failed to stop the enemy, they had made it stronger. Every weapon, every tactic, every piece of technology they had used was now part of the Devourer swarm. The next civilization to face them would be fighting an enemy armed with the combined knowledge of hundreds of dead worlds. As the last defense ships were destroyed, the Devourer swarm began its work. They methodically processed the wreckage of the Nexus, absorbing every useful component and discarding the rest. They had grown larger, smarter, and more dangerous. The news of the Nexus's fall spread quickly across the galaxy. The Council's greatest defense had lasted less than 4 hours. The Devourer swarm was now only 3 weeks away from the core worlds, where trillions of beings waited helplessly for their destruction. And somewhere in the depths of space, A small human fleet was racing toward an enemy that had just become exponentially more powerful than before. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system with barely a whisper. 200 ships out of nowhere, their dark hulls almost invisible against the star field. Admiral Sarah stood on the bridge of the EAS Determination, watching the tactical display as her sensors mapped the destruction ahead. The Nexus was gone. Where once stood the galaxy's greatest space station, now there was only an expanding field of debris. Twisted metal and broken hull fragments drifted through space like the bones of a dead giant. The sight was both beautiful and terrible, billions of tiny lights reflecting off the wreckage, each one representing countless lives lost. "My God," whispered Commander Jackson, the fleet's weapons officer, "the whole thing is just gone." Admiral nodded grimly. The reports from the Galactic Council had described the battle, but seeing the aftermath was different. An entire civilization's greatest achievement had been reduced to scrap metal in just a few hours. "Status report," Admiral ordered. "All ships report ready for combat," replied Captain Martinez, the fleet coordinator. "Kinetic weapon systems are charged and loaded. Mass drivers are online. All ships are maintaining communication silence as ordered." "Good, what about our friends out there?" Commander Jackson checked his sensors. "We're picking up long-range communications from Galactic Council observation posts. There." Well, they seemed confused about our arrival. Admiral almost smiled. She could imagine the alien reaction to humanity's fleet. After losing 25,000 advanced warships, the Council was probably wondering what 200 primitive human vessels could possibly accomplish. "Put me through to the Council observers," Admiral said. The communication system crackled to life. The voice that came through was translated from an alien language, but the confusion was clear. "Human fleet, this is Observer Station Delta. We were not expecting you to arrive so soon. Your ships appear to be much smaller than anticipated. This is Admiral of the Earth Defense Force. We received your distress call and came as quickly as we could. What's the current situation?" There was a pause. Then another alien voice joined the conversation, this one sounding more official. "Admiral, this is Commander Ara of the Defense Force. I must inform you that the tactical situation has changed significantly since our original message. The Devourer swarm has grown much larger and more capable after absorbing technology from our latest defeat." "Understood. Where is the enemy now?" "They are currently processing the remains of the Nexus, approximately 3 million kilometers from your position. Admiral, I must ask, how many ships do you have?" 200. The silence on the communication channel lasted for almost a full minute. Finally, Commander Ara spoke again, and her voice was careful, diplomatic. "Admiral, with respect, we just lost 25,000 ships equipped with the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. Perhaps you should wait for reinforcements." Admiral looked at her bridge crew. They were all watching her, waiting for her decision. These were men and women who had volunteered to travel across the galaxy to fight an enemy none of them had ever seen. They trusted her judgment completely. "Commander Ara, I appreciate your concern, but we didn't travel 43 light-years to wait in the parking lot. We're going to engage the enemy." "Admiral, please reconsider. The Devourer swarm adapts to any weapon used against it. They learn from every attack and become immune to it within seconds. They will study your weapons and turn them against you." "Thank you for the warning, Commander. We'll keep that in mind." Admiral cut the communication link before the alien could protest further. She knew what the Council observers were thinking. They had just watched their greatest fleet get destroyed by an enemy that learned to counter every advanced weapon in existence. Now a small group of humans was planning to attack that same enemy with primitive technology. From their perspective, it was suicide. "Admiral," said Lieutenant Park from the sensor station, "I'm detecting movement from the debris field. The Devourer units are starting to form up." Admiral looked at the main display. The enemy was emerging from the wreckage of the Nexus like a dark cloud. Individual units were impossible to count, but there were clearly millions of them. Each one was roughly the size of a human destroyer, but they moved with perfect coordination. No wasted motion, no unnecessary communication. They simply flowed through space like a living organism. "They're beautiful," Commander Jackson said quietly, "in a terrible sort of way." He was right. The Devourer units had sleek organic curves that seemed to shift and change as they moved. Their surfaces reflected light in strange ways, sometimes appearing solid metal, sometimes seeming almost transparent. They had clearly been designed by an intelligence far beyond human understanding. "Distance to target?" Admiral asked. 2 million kilometers and closing, Lieutenant Park replied. "They're moving directly toward us, estimated contact in 12 minutes. Admiral activated the fleet communication system. "All ships, this is Admiral. In 12 minutes we're going to engage an enemy that has destroyed hundreds of civilizations. They adapt to advanced weapons and learn from every attack, but there's something they don't know about us." She paused, looking out at the approaching enemy force. "We're not advanced. We don't use energy weapons or exotic matter or quantum effects. We use simple physics. Mass times velocity equals force, and we're very good at applying force to things we want to destroy." Across the fleet, weapons officers checked their systems one final time. Unlike the sleek energy weapons of the Galactic Council, human weapons were crude and mechanical. That used magnetic fields to accelerate metal slugs to incredible speeds, mass drivers that could launch projectiles weighing several tons, missile systems carrying conventional explosive warheads. By galactic standards, it was primitive technology, but it had been perfected through centuries of human warfare. 8 minutes to contact, Lieutenant Park announced. On the main display, Admiral could see the Devourer swarm spreading out into attack formation. They moved with mechanical precision, each unit taking its assigned position without any apparent communication. As they approached, their surfaces began to change, cycling through different configurations as if they were preparing for battle. "Admiral," Commander Jackson said, "I'm not detecting any energy weapon signatures from the enemy. No plasma building, no quantum effects, no gravitational distortions." Admiral frowned. "What are they carrying?" "Based on sensor analysis, it appears to be kinetic weapons. Mass drivers, projectile systems, exactly like ours but with some modifications." The realization hit Admiral like a physical blow. The Devourers had learned about kinetic weapons from their previous battles. They had encountered human-style weapons before, adapted to them, and improved on them. The one advantage she had been counting on was gone. 4 minutes to contact. Admiral looked around her bridge. Her crew was waiting for orders, but she could see the doubt in their eyes. They had come here with a plan, and that plan was falling apart before the battle even started. "Admiral," Lieutenant Park said, "I'm reading something strange from the enemy formation. They're not scanning us." "What do you mean?" Every time the Devourers encountered a new enemy, they immediately began active sensor scans. They analyzed weapons, shields, propulsion systems, everything. But they're not scanning our fleet. It's like they think they already know everything about us. Admiral stared at the tactical display. The Devourer units were moving closer, but they showed no signs of the intense analysis that had preceded every other battle. They were approaching with the confidence of an enemy that had already won. "They think we're the same as everyone else," Admiral said slowly. "They think human weapons are just inferior versions of what they've already encountered." Commander Jackson looked up from his console. "Are they wrong?" Admiral thought about the question carefully. Human kinetic weapons were simpler than their alien counterparts. They used basic electromagnetic acceleration instead of exotic particle effects. They fired solid projectiles instead of energy constructs. By every measure of galactic technology, they were primitive. But there was one thing the Devourers might not have learned from their previous encounters with kinetic weapons. Something that made human weapons different from everyone else's. "Target the largest enemy unit," Admiral ordered. "All ships prepare to fire on my command, full kinetic barrage." "Admiral," Commander Jackson said, "if they've adapted to kinetic weapons already." "They've adapted to alien kinetic weapons," Admiral replied. "Let's see how they handle the human version." The distance between the two fleets continued to close. The Devourer swarm moved with perfect coordination, showing no signs of concern about the much smaller human force. They had destroyed thousands of ships in previous battles. 200 more would make little difference. But as Admiral watched the enemy approach, she felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. The aliens were right about one thing: the Devourers could adapt to any weapon they encountered. The question was whether they could adapt fast enough. The moment arrived with mathematical precision. Two fleets faced each other across 300,000 kilometers of empty space. The Devourer swarm moved forward with mechanical confidence, their dark forms flowing like liquid metal against the stars. The human fleet held formation, weapons charged and ready. Admiral Sarah watched the tactical display on her bridge. Every instinct told her this was suicide. The enemy had destroyed civilizations armed with technology centuries ahead of humanity. They had adapted to every weapon, countered every strategy. Logic said her small fleet would be swept aside like debris. But Admiral had spent her entire career learning that logic didn't always win wars. "Range?" she asked. 200,000 kilometers, Lieutenant Park replied. "Enemy fleet is maintaining approach vector, still no active scanning from their units." The Devourer swarm filled the forward viewports now. Millions of units moving in perfect synchronization, each one roughly the size of a human destroyer, but infinitely more alien. Their surfaces seemed to shift and change as they approached, cycling through different configurations like a computer trying different programs. "They're so sure of themselves," Commander Jackson observed. "No evasive maneuvers, no battle formation changes, they're just moving straight at us." Admiral nodded. The Devourers had good reason for confidence. In their database, they had detailed information about kinetic weapons from dozens of civilizations. They had encountered mass drivers, projectile systems, and every variation of kinetic warfare the galaxy had to offer. From their perspective, the human fleet represented nothing new. They were about to learn how wrong they were. 100,000 kilometers, Lieutenant Park announced, entering optimal firing range. Admiral opened the fleet communication channel. "All ships, this is Admiral. You know what we're here to do. These things have destroyed hundreds of worlds and killed trillions of beings. Today, we show them what happens when they mess with humanity." She paused, watching the enemy fleet grow larger on her screens. "Remember, we're not trying to out-tech them. We're not trying to be clever. We're going to hit them with the oldest, simplest, most brutal force in the universe. Raw kinetic energy. Fire when ready." The human fleet opened fire. 200 ships unleashed their full kinetic arsenal simultaneously, accelerated tungsten slugs to 30% of light speed. Mass drivers hurled projectiles the size of telephone poles. Missile systems launched thousands of warheads carrying simple high-explosive charges. But these weren't the sophisticated kinetic weapons the Devourers had encountered before. Alien civilizations had tried to improve kinetic weapons by adding exotic effects, energy fields, and complex targeting systems. They had made them more advanced, more efficient, more civilized. Humans had made them more deadly. The tungsten slugs were not just projectiles. They were designed to fragment on impact, creating thousands of smaller pieces that would spread destruction through enemy formations. The mass driver rounds were solid, depleted uranium, chosen not for any exotic properties, but because it was incredibly dense and stayed together when it hit something. The missiles carried conventional explosives that had been perfected through centuries of human warfare. The volley crossed the space between the fleets in seconds. Admiral watched the tactical display as millions of projectiles raced toward the Devourer swarm. And for the first time in recorded galactic history, the Devourer units showed signs of confusion. Their analysis systems activated, trying to understand the incoming attack. But there was nothing complex to analyze. No energy fields to counter, no quantum effects to study, no exotic matter to decode. Just chunks of metal moving very fast. The first impacts came 30 seconds later. A tungsten slug traveling at 90,000 kilometers per second hit a Devourer unit dead center. The enemy machine simply ceased to exist. It didn't explode or break apart. It was converted into expanding plasma by the sheer kinetic force. The slug continued through the debris cloud and struck two more units behind it, destroying them just as completely. Across the Devourer formation, similar destruction was spreading. Mass driver rounds punched through enemy units like they were made of paper. High-explosive missiles detonated in the middle of enemy formations, their simple chemical explosions tearing through sophisticated machinery that had no defense against basic physics. The Devourer swarm tried to adapt. Their analysis systems worked frantically, attempting to find some pattern they could counter. But there was nothing to counter. The human weapons operated on principles so simple that adaptation was meaningless. You cannot adapt to a mountain falling on you. You cannot counter gravity or momentum or basic physics. The Devourer's perfect adaptability became useless against weapons that relied on nothing more complex than Newton's laws of motion. "My God," Commander Jackson whispered, "they're just dying." He was right. The Devourer units were being destroyed faster than they could process what was happening to them. Their sophisticated analysis systems, designed to counter the most advanced weapons in the galaxy, were completely overwhelmed by the simple brutality of human kinetic weapons. Some units tried to change their configuration to deflect incoming projectiles. But a tungsten slug moving at relativistic speeds doesn't deflect. It goes through armor, through defensive systems, through the entire structure of a machine and out the other side. Other units attempted to use point defense systems, firing their own weapons at incoming rounds. But human missiles were designed to survive in Earth's violent battlefields. They had been built to withstand laser defense systems, electromagnetic pulses, and direct hits from other weapons. The Devourer point defense systems might as well have been shooting spitballs. "Second volley ready," Commander Jackson reported. "Fire," Admiral ordered without hesitation. Another wave of destruction swept through the Devourer formation. This time, the enemy units tried a different approach. Instead of analyzing the weapons, they tried to analyze the humans using them. But the human fleet's communication systems were encrypted, their tactical planning was carried out on closed channels, and their strategy was too simple to decode anyway. Hit the enemy with heavy objects moving at high speed. Repeat until enemy stops moving. "Admiral," Lieutenant Park called out, excitement clear in his voice. "Enemy formation is breaking up. They're trying to retreat." On the main display, Admiral could see the Devourer swarm beginning to scatter. For the first time in their existence, these perfect killing machines were running away. They had encountered something they couldn't adapt to, couldn't counter, couldn't understand. Simple, brutal human physics. But Admiral wasn't about to let them escape. "All ships pursue and destroy, don't let any of them get away." The human fleet broke formation and began hunting down individual Devourer units. It wasn't even a fair fight. The enemy machines were designed to counter advanced technology, but they had no answer for weapons that were older than itself. Human destroyers chased down Devourer scouts. They're picking off targets with methodical precision. Heavy cruisers used their mass drivers to punch holes through entire groups of enemy units. Even the smaller human ships were deadly. Their conventional missiles could destroy enemy machines that had shrugged off quantum torpedoes. Within an hour, the battle was over. The Devourer swarm that had destroyed hundreds of civilizations was nothing but expanding clouds of metallic debris. Millions of enemy units, each representing centuries of technological development, had been reduced to scrap metal by weapons that any human engineer could have built in a basic machine shop. Admiral stood on her bridge, watching the final enemy units being hunted down. The tactical display showed her fleet spread across the battle zone, methodically destroying every trace of the Devourer presence. "Damage report," she ordered. "Minimal, Admiral," Captain Martinez replied. "We lost 3 ships to enemy fire before they broke formation, 47 wounded, no other casualties." 3 ships. Admiral thought about the alien fleet that had lost 25,000 vessels to the same enemy. The difference wasn't technology or superior tactics. The difference was approach. "Communications, open a channel to the Galactic Council observers," Admiral commanded. The alien voice that came through the speakers was filled with shock and disbelief. "Admiral, this is Commander Ara. We are monitoring your battle. Is it true? Has the Devourer swarm been destroyed?" "Confirmed, Commander. All enemy units have been eliminated. The immediate threat has been neutralized." There was a long pause before the alien replied. "Admiral, I must ask, what weapons did you use? Our sensors detected no energy signatures, no exotic matter, no advanced technology of any kind." Admiral smiled grimly. "We used rocks, Commander, very fast rocks." I don't understand." "Kinetic weapons, simple projectiles accelerated to high velocity. No energy fields to analyze, no quantum effects to counter, just basic physics applied with extreme force." Another pause, then Commander Ara spoke again, and her voice carried a note of wonder. "You defeated an enemy that had absorbed the technological knowledge of hundreds of civilizations, using primitive weapons." Not primitive, Admiral corrected. Fundamental, there's a difference. As the last Devourer unit was destroyed, Admiral began planning the journey home. Earth would want a full report, and the Galactic Council would undoubtedly have questions. Lots of questions. But one thing was clear. Humanity had just announced its presence to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible. The species that other civilizations dismissed as primitive had solved an impossible problem through the simple application of overwhelming force. Admiral, Commander Jackson said, incoming transmission from the Council. They're asking if we would be willing to assist with other threats in the future. Admiral looked out at the debris field that had once been humanity's greatest enemy. Somewhere in that expanding cloud of metal and destruction was a lesson the galaxy would not soon forget. Sometimes the old ways were the best ways. Sometimes sophisticated wasn't better than simple. And sometimes, when you wanted something dead, the best tool for the job was still a rock thrown very, very hard. Tell the Council we'll consider it, Admiral replied, but next time we do things our way. The human fleet began its journey home, leaving behind a galaxy that would never again underestimate the power of primitive solutions to complex problems. And in the empty space where the Devourer swarm had once threatened all life, only silence remained. Silent and safe,